Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Leaders Show, where we talk key issues and news at the intersection of business and technology in hopes of making you a better digital leader. Today, we're discussing data classification, the missing piece of the AI puzzle, plus headlines for digital leaders from the world of enterprise technology. We're live every Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific on LinkedIn and YouTube, and the audio recording is available the following week wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks to our sponsor, Oracle NetSuite. Their cloud ERP helps provide real-time visibility into operational and financial performance. Podcast followers can get preferred pricing of up to 45% off. Just go to irpaai.com/netsuite for more information. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up IRPA AI. We're a professional association, media, and peer-to-peer research network, providing education, networking, and advice to over 130,000 members globally, all around automation, enterprise AI, and digital transformation. I'm joined today by Chris Cerdak. He's a senior analyst at IRPA AI, formerly White House Chief Transformation Office Advisor and partner for digital transformation at Gartner and EY. Chris, good afternoon.
Or good morning, depending upon where you are. Yes.
Yes, I forgot you're on the other coast. I know, but we got people on the other side of the pond too. So,
we're a global community. Yeah.
Speaking of global community, I'm not sure that you can put those two words together anymore. It seems like the world is dividing in half in tariff world.
Yeah, it makes me think of nuclear fission. Once you get the chain reaction going, then either good things happen, you generate electricity, or bad things happen. Things kind of get blown to pieces. So this chain reaction, I think, has been initiated, and now we get to see if it's controlled or uncontrolled.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. But the tariffs on metals, on steel and aluminum, took effect today. Things are amping up with Canada. Trump administration now threatening 50% tariffs on some Canadian goods in retaliation. So that's going on. Europe is also kind of coming together. The EU is seems like they're kind of coming together to maybe do less business with the US, supposedly. So interesting times. Tariffs have also impacted hiring. According to ADP, hiring in the US slowed in February based on some of the tech industry, utility industry, amongst the top industry verticals affected by it. But on the positive note, inflation seems like it's slower than expected. And the House has passed an initial bill to avoid a government shutdown. So we shall see.
So, you live in the old Chinese curse of may you live in interesting times when you say, well, the rate of inflation is slowing down. That's sort of like, well, your cancer isn't spreading as fast. So that's our good news of the day. I'm actually a bit more bullish about things. But what we're really witnessing, and not to get too philosophical, is sort of the unbundling of the post-World War II global world order that has been part of how our world has operated for 80-something years. And that sort of thing is not going to happen without a lot of broken glass. So I think we're going to see a lot of broken glass. And unfortunately for us, we're the ones that get to live through that time frame. But I think if you look at $35 trillion or whatever of debt and so forth, that we were going to reach this point was somewhat inevitable. The way you get out of it is going to be necessarily painful. But to your point about the tariffs with Canada, in light of our guests that we're about to bring on, I myself just went out and stocked up on 15 kilograms of maple syrup, just so I'm set to make it to war.
That's one thing we can't do without is our maple syrup. But more trouble in the retail space as well. It seems like a couple more announcements coming out, around just added costs, being passed on to consumers. Kohl's kind of stock dropped yesterday. They were the latest retailer to offer disappointing sales forecasts. Party City, I don't know if you guys have that on the West Coast, but I know you're in New York or so. Party City filed for bankruptcy last month. They were around for 40 years. And, one of those things you look at you remember as a kid, going to that wall of Halloween costumes and
birthday piñatas.
And birthday piñatas. Yep. Joanne Fabrics, I think, was the big one before that, where my first reaction was they're still around, and then they're not anymore.
I mean, Dan, to my earlier point that I think these dies have been cast. Now we're just living with it happening, right? We effectively had free money ever since the financial collapse of 2008. So a lot of these companies were zombie companies. I mean, if you look at their financials, they literally were surviving on financing cash flow. So I mean, to actually have money to make their payments per year, they had to go out and take loans, which you could do at 0.5% interest rate. Those days are over. So I think these companies were killed off a decade ago. It's just taken a decade for them to bleed out. Not to minimize the impact of losing them, but I think that's it. It's a longer term sort of thing that's finally manifesting itself. And one other point that you brought up a minute ago to the metal stuff, the danger of playing this game of we're going to tariff you and make your stuff more expensive to come in is how long does it take to either create a steel mill from scratch or reactivate one that was shut down 40 years ago? Our response to resupplying ourselves in light of the tariff can take a decade or more. An oil refinery or laying a pipeline is a 15-year project once you get the permits. So there is the danger of playing the tariff game that you're making bets that you can't bluff your way out of, right? If we are going to increase the price of steel by 50%, it's 6 years before we actually have a response that is economically viable. So it's a tough game.
On the other side of that coin, Spotify has now reached a market valuation of $110 billion. I mean, we were talking about can they survive maybe a year or so ago. Now they're bigger than the two largest record labels combined. Warner and Universal are worth roughly $70 billion combined. So interesting turn of events for the tech-based music streamer.
And at the same time, a bunch of the other streaming services, predominantly video, are really, really struggling. And so I view that almost as like the Spotify is the YouTube of the music world to a certain extent. And so if you own this is what made Amazon really successful. It was actually that they owned the last half mile connecting to the customer. Didn't matter where the products were made and so forth, but they knew when the order was placed and where it was going to go. So yeah, the record labels, they might have been sourcing the content up to this point, but Spotify owned the last half mile and then it's game over. So I think that's, again, Walt Disney having a really tough time with Disney Plus and losing subscribership. They tried to take over the last half mile, but they were really a content provider. And so I view Spotify as a musical YouTube. By owning that last half mile, who cares what's upstream? You dominate.
And Waymo and Uber are debuting the robo-taxi service. Lots been talked about this for a while, but it's finally launched in Austin, Texas. You can go into the Uber app and get this fully automated driving taxi. So it's a bit of a rival challenge to Tesla, which is planning its own robo-taxi service that launched this year. Waymo is owned by Alphabet, Google, and they had about 200,000 weekly trips in San Francisco, LA, and Phoenix. Have you ever been in one of these things, Chris?
I haven't been in one of the robo ones. I think I'd be kind of freaked out if I was. It'd feel too much like an amusement park ride.
I remember somebody telling me, tech leader years and years ago, like the very early days prototypes of this, he had the opportunity to be in, one of these, experimental cars. And he said he was in the car for an hour. He said there was 3 stages. He said the first 20 minutes, he was scared as hell. He said the second 20 minutes, it was so exciting. Like once you realized that it was relatively safe and it wasn't going to crash. The next 20 minutes was super exciting. He said the last 20 minutes was super boring. He's like, I didn't know what to do. I didn't have to do anything. I wasn't driving. I wasn't looking around. Like, what do you do when you have a long drive and you don't have to actually drive?
So this is near and dear to me. My oldest is 15, and she just last night she spent 2 hours going through her driving lesson digital stuff as she's getting ready to get her permit. And basically it's a total of, I think, 40 hours of instruction, 39 and a half of which is just videos of kids crashing into each other, which I'm not sure that's totally effective as a method of training. Reminds me a lot of training in LLM. But I don't know that it's necessarily good that we're teaching or that we're letting people not learn how to drive. There's the old joke that a stick shift, a manual transmission in a car is the Gen Z anti-theft device, right? I grew up with the 5-speed manual, so I know how to use it, and a clutch. But my other thought with this one is it's time for me to call my broker and start shorting the car insurance companies. Because literally, I mean, all the revenue comes from the drivers paying their premiums. If millions of people are no longer paying premiums, but there's still accidents, I want to short the heck out of the insurance companies. I'm always looking for that alternate, unanticipated consequence, and that's one that hits me.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. Last story for this week is some policymakers in Washington are at the Human X conference this week, weighing in on the future of U.S. AI regulation, which has seemingly all but stopped since the new administration took over. But the co-chair of the bipartisan AI task force is actually a Republican in the House, and says that they're still working on kind of threading that needle and doing things that they think are right, regardless of the climate. So Kamala Harris, former vice president, was there as well. She was kind of responsible for the AI pieces in the previous administration, kind of emphasizing how important this is. But interesting that there's people still on the Republican side that are pushing for this.
Yeah, I all of this feels an awful lot like putting up. There's an old saying, stop or don't put up fences after the horse has already run out of the barn. And I mean, we're $1 trillion into this AI experiment that we've been doing over the last decade ish. And so the idea of applying regulation at this point is kind of hilarious. We're down this path, and which doesn't mean don't do it. I think I've said on this show, AI governance is absolutely critical because AI is ungovernable. That doesn't mean you don't try, because by trying, we're going to figure out, hopefully about 2 seconds before the AI gets really smart and takes over, that we just lost the game. So I think these efforts are good and necessary, but they're almost necessarily not going to succeed because we're too far behind the horse running off to the horizon.
Yeah, and then you talk about what are the right guardrails to put in place, right? So it's a good segue to our main topic today, which is data classification. I want to invite our guest, Jaap Mantel. He's a data classification and AI data readiness expert. Jaap, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, and I enjoy the stories listening to what's happening politically from the comfortable territory of the 51st state.
Yeah, that's
maple syrup.
You heard our maple syrup joke then, yes.
I heard you're all stacked up, so we're good to go. But everyone here has side businesses, so we're always happy to send you some more.
Sounds good. Black market maple syrup business. You heard it here first, folks.
I was going to do a Tim Hortons one, but those are played.
Well, I used to think those jokes were hilarious because the Tim Hortons are everywhere, and then I realized that I plan all of my road trips around Tim Hortons stops. Like that's literally all I do now. And I upgraded my American drinking size, so my European drinking sizes to North American drinking sizes. So it's the size of my head. So yeah, no, I'm getting there. Like we're all good.
Jaap, before we jump in, give everybody a little background on your career and how you got into where you are.
Yeah, for sure. So let's see. Jaap Mantel. I'm 40 years old. No, 41. I just turned 41. I think after 35, it doesn't really matter anymore. We're just now middle-aged. Let's see. I got into the Microsoft space about 20 years ago. And I worked for infrastructure company. I worked for search companies. I worked for service companies. The last, when I moved to Canada, I ended up in digital workspaces, so intranets, and presenting data in a wide variety of ways and options. And So for the last 3.5 years now, I worked with data, which in my mind is kind of like why we're all here to begin with. Like you can have infrastructure tools all you want, but if you don't know what data you have, you don't know what you're backing up, if you can't manage it, then what are you doing? We can focus on search and everything else. But again, if we don't know what data we have, then how are you able to find it, right? And same with intranets, extranets, portals, presentation layers. These days, we would be talking significantly more about application management. So what tools have access to your data? There's a wide variety of it. But I talk about data all day, every day. And I always ask every CEO, CTO, CDO, CAIO, whatever person you want, and this goes from very small to the largest companies in the world. I always ask one question: do you know what data you have? And I haven't met anyone yet that answered that with yes. So everyone usually laughs at me, especially the bigger the company is, the louder the laugh gets, because it's a silly question. People don't know what data they have. And so that I find that super intriguing. And there's a whole history behind why we are who we are, where we are, how we got to this point. And sticking to the topic here, AI is really bringing out the aspect or the elements that we don't know what data we have. And for the first time ever, like for the last 20 years, we could get away with it. There's all kinds of reasons. But now we can see that data breaches, we can see insurance companies, we can see the CFOs of the golf course, and they all have that one focus. We need to have that data. So for 20 years, we lived on promises. And now everyone's kind of like, no, we actually need this. And we have to go, we have to do something with this. And so that's what I do all day, every day. I get to have productive conversations, mostly, sometimes a little bit of arguing with people, and have conversations about their data, which to me is like the glue, the missing link, whatever you want to call it, in people's projects. So I'm having a lot of fun.
So we were talking a little bit before we went live. Before we get into why it's relevant and important, how did we get here? Why is that the current state of things? Yep.
I mean, so roughly 20 years ago, when I joined the whole spiel of things, we were introduced. I mean, first we had Tahoe, right? Microsoft always had companies, organizations, and in 2001 they introduced WSS, Windows SharePoint Server, and they quickly changed messages from we don't need governance to the actually SharePoint can be your centralized way of data forms and processes, right? And then we have managed metadata. Then in 2003 and 2007, they kind of canceled that. But back in 2010, they realized, no, managed metadata is kind of super important. Let's bring it back. So that's what they did. And they're like, well, we kind of need to find stuff. So in 2008, Microsoft purchased Fast Search, right? We want to be able to find stuff. We have all this data. Congratulations. We have challenges around migration. Why? Because every time we have a new tool, we have new options, and they're not necessarily compatible with each other. So how are we able to find stuff from the back end? You have to be able to back up, recovery, restore. In the early days, you couldn't even do that. Like when you deleted a site collection in the early versions of SharePoint, you had a big problem because there was no recycle bin, no cover, no backup, nothing. So I work for a company called AvePoint, still very, very big, gets bigger, gets grow. It's a fantastic company, but we made absolute millions by selling simple tools like recycle bin for SharePoint site collections. That's all we did. I mean, the company did a lot more, don't get me wrong, but just on that one element, millions and millions of dollars by simply selling a recycle bin. And so throughout the years, things got introduced, got integrated. So in 2013, Fast Search and all of the search capabilities were introduced. And then eventually you go to BCOS, which has data center issues, but that's a whole different game. You end up to the journey where we are right now, where everyone kind of goes like, okay, let's go to Office 365, right? There's a few steps I'm skipping, but let's be in Office 365. So we have one platform, continuous updates, and people are getting more and more comfortable with Microsoft hosting and managing their data, or Google, or whatever tool you want. So now we're ending up at a term where it's kind of like, okay, we're selling down. We don't have to do a migration every 3 years. Microsoft isn't too worried anymore about their 3-year contracts with enterprise, which was a huge motivator for the 3-year cycle. But every time we just get our upgrades or get our updates. So now we just get yearly licenses. So now that AI hits, we've had all kinds of challenges, all kinds of options, all kinds of ways. We have, throughout the last 20 years, all kinds of excuses of why we do what we do and tools that we purchased. But now for the first time, we have to be kind of like, okay, what can we do with this? And AI is one of those huge steps where if you do it correctly, we can go into massive leaps forward. But it's also exposing the current situation, and that is no one knows what data they have. So then it's kind of like, okay, what do we do about it? Well, certain regions like Europe, for example, they have a very strong focus on compliance with GDPR for the last few years. They focused on eliminating illegal data, which is very handy because you don't want to have that in any large language model. But that's kind of how we got here, why we are here, why we are who we are and where we are. And it's an interesting one which sparks many different types of topics. But most often the question is, okay, now how do we take that next step? How do we take that leap? How do we achieve value? And that's something that not just America and Canada are facing, but it's really across the globe.
Jaap, I think when you and I started our conversation, not so many months ago, but just from common interests, a lot of the discussion was, and I've been in this sort of data management, governance, whatever space for a quarter of a century ish. It was hard to sell because it just wasn't sexy. Usually people had to have something go horribly wrong in their organization before they would start investing in these sort of technologies or platforms. How do I clean up my data? How do I have a better sense of control over it? But I think that the message is now out that if data is the raw material for AI and people want AI, you got to get your data stuff in shape and know what you're working with before you throw it into an LLM to train it. Is that your sense as well, that I see in 2025, there's finally this awakening of, oh, hey, data matters. This is actually an interesting topic. Is that consistent with your experience?
Yeah, I mean, if you can have a Bugatti in the garage, but if there's no roads to drive it on, then you have a nice Bugatti in the garage. And effectively, it's like you're saying, it's not sexy. I think you called it before, you called it plumbing. Plumbing isn't sexy. Like a pipeline for oil and gas isn't sexy, but if you want to be energy independent, you're going to have to transport it one way or the other. And in the same way with AI, like AI is only as good as the fuel that you put into it. Like, yes, you can go through all the classes, you can do all the tests, you can go all the training exercises, but so far, every single one of them I attended and I talked to the trainers, there's always a little asterisk in the bottom. And that little asterisk says you are yourself responsible for getting all your data ready, to organize it, to filter through it, to cipher through it, to mark it, to label it. Then let me sell you the dream. So right now we are at a place where all these training sessions effectively look at about 8 business units or line of businesses, and they're selling people the dream. And people want to go. They want to be ready. They want to take that next step. But then you're kind of like, okay, I'm sold on the dream. The dream is sexy. The plumbing isn't sexy. So how do we get there? And it's really that next step where I'm kind of like, guys, we have such huge opportunity. If you like data more, great. If you like another tool, use another tool. I'd argue we're significantly better, but I'm also super biased. But the point remains the same. We have to do something about our data. So we're talking about AI and the cat's out the bag and over the horses out of the stable. Like here in Alberta, we're building some of the biggest AI centers we have. Why? Because it's absolutely freaking cold. That's why right now I'm sitting with a sweater, and last night there was about 3 inches of snow, and we like it here. I'm happy here. Like I miss out on vitamin D, but I get to have some cool weather and I get to go hunting. But we can use that cold to cool down data centers. But we're having the same issue here in Alberta, where I have these meetings with 7, 8 directors of the Canadian government, and they're all in the room. And I ask them a simple question. I'm kind of like, okay, great, guys. So you're selling me the dream again. But, how are we ciphering through all this data? How do you deal with this? How do you manage this? And to this day, everyone is still looking around. Like, people aren't willing to look at it from a point of view, from a foundation. And like you're saying, Chris, the data is your foundation for it. And your foundation can be as good or as bad as you want it to be. See, data classification is great for AI, but it solves a wide variety of other issues. Governance was one that was mentioned. Same with compliance, but you have other things like a data breach. AI is a big one, but also security enablement like DLP and everything else. Sorry, still a little ill. But when you start focusing on data classification for the first time in your life, you're going to truly see what's happening in your organization. So I'll give another example. We do a lot of data breach recoveries. And so we're doing one. It's a company. The only thing I'll say is that they're operating in the airline space, or I should say aviation space. It's not an airline. And they're like, okay, our data is on the dark web. We don't know what's happening. We have no idea. And so in the last 7 days, we presented to them. We have literally found your admin server credentials for everything. So if these people figure out what is happening, if they know what they're having, which is now literally everyone can download it or buy it on the dark web. If people find out that this is accessible, you have a very, very large problem. But what people don't seem to understand is that AI is effectively a data breach in the most technical term, because you're giving your information away. Now, it's very different if we're talking about, like, if we separate the two versions of AI. Sometimes when people talk about AI, they're talking about, there's a note taker in my meeting, or there's a help me rewrite my email, right? The stuff that you get on LinkedIn if you write a post, and then AI is like, hey, do you want me to do it for you? And the interesting thing is that if you put illegal data, and I'm defining illegal data as stuff that shouldn't be there. Either it's non-compliant, it's sensitive, it has security information, or any of that type of stuff in it. You can't undo it. It's there. So when we do our assessment, it's not just that we find illegal data, is we find a ridiculous amount of stuff that shouldn't be here. People are uploading sometimes their personal data, sometimes even their holiday pictures, into like their servers.
Yeah.
And then I have to explain, like, are you realizing that your let's call them beach pictures of your little girls are being ingested by a large language model?
It's interesting, Jaap. You mentioned this. I was just reading an article this morning about, we tend to think of banks and financial and healthcare, highly regulated industries, but there's been this kind of recent cybersecurity focus around the airlines and hospitality industry, because some of these bad actors have realized that there's a whole lot of information, stored in some of these data sets. MGM Resorts just paid a $45 million settlement over breaches to their customer data in 2019, 2023. So it's not just the financial space, right?
It's everywhere, literally everywhere. And so organizations have or people have realized that data is worth something. So they're looking for, the path of least resistance, which is usually people. And then if you look, for example, if we stick to what you mentioned, healthcare, sometimes certain types of organizations, like in healthcare, they have doctors, and the doctor will work for like 4 or 5 hospitals on and off, and effectively they get added to these groups, and they're walking around their phone and like, hey, there's a 2-factor authentication, or approve this or approve that. They don't care. I'm not saying doctors don't care. I'm saying that if you work for 4 or 5 hospitals at the same time, and you get all kinds of approvals and this and that, all you want to be is you want to be a doctor. You want to do doctor stuff. And you don't want to be bothered with all kinds of stuff on your phone that you don't know what it is. So what we're finding is that often in these type of professions, it's fairly easy to get people to approve a login, and then you're in. So then the question is, what happens? Because up till now, if we follow our whole journey, people have been like, okay, well, I've got this iceberg of information and data, and we just need 10 layers of protection, and that will cover me. But then everybody got a mobile phone, and it's kind of like, well, now actually we need to change. So we went more into a service-based application model. Now we're kind of like, now everyone really has a phone. We're going to give individual rights and freedoms, which was very interesting because for a while, even in SharePoint, people were given individual rights. That was quickly canceled because it was completely unmanageable. It was absolute train wreck because there's no way that an IT guy in the basement, like myself, is going to keep track of thousands of people that have access somewhere somehow. So it's going to be all over the place. And certain verticals, if you will, we have some on our website, by the way, because we've analyzed billions and billions of data sets. And if you want to see specifically what type of data exists per vertical, then we can actually demonstrate to you. It's free. You don't have to even give me any of your information. It's datamore.us. And we can actually show you these things. Because hospitality, car rentals, hotels, airlines, these guys are drowning in PII. And it's a very interesting phenomenon for sure.
Apparently, people are even trying to steal awards points. I never read that, but I went to do some cash back on my credit card yesterday, and they were authenticating me like I was transferring 10 grand or something. It was wild.
20 plus years ago, I worked with one of the largest hotel chains in the world, helping to build their reservation system and their online presence. And yeah, even then there was a huge black market on reselling or stealing or moving around the airline points. Jaap, you touched on it a little bit, but I really want to emphasize. So you guys go out, you'll do a free assessment for a customer. Just say, hey, give us a sample of your data, and we'll show you what kind of stuff is in there. And you've shared with us some of those results, and they're stunning. You know, people have death certificates and driver's licenses, and as you said, root passwords to the entire network. You know, give a sense for people that are interested in that kind of thing, what that looks like and what sort of nightmares you are able to uncover in relatively short order.
Yeah, I mean, we do the assessments. Why? Because there's a lot of what I like to call fluff on the internet. Like everyone is an expert and everyone is amazing and everybody can do everything. So for us to demonstrate, like, guys, we're actually really good at what we do, and we can truly help you. We just do these free assessments. So we offer them. I mean, they're free through Urbra, to be exact. And otherwise, they're not. But what we do is we effectively take a sample data. Let's say 10, 20, 25, 50 gigabytes of data. Or we take a group of people. We prefer cybersecurity people. Why? Because if we show that cybersecurity experts have all kinds of credit cards, PII, travel information, their home address, their kids' schools, and everything else, then I only ask one question. Like, this is your situation. What do you expect from these 500 people that are not security experts? That's really what we do. So we go in, and within all we do is we simply connect indexation to a repository or location, which can be done in realistically speaking, let's say half an hour. So within half an hour of your time, we focus on a sample group of data. We then run it through what we have is called multi-factor classification. So even within the search and findability, you have effectively, I mean, there's more, but to keep it simple, there's two ways of doing things. One is we're going to crawl through all of your data, which can take 6 to 9 months. And the other one is kind of like, okay, let's focus on indexation. We do the latter. Why? Because if you focus on indexation, we don't just look at metadata or an item or a name. We go through a document. We even look at pictures. We OCR the picture. And then the next layer in our multi-factor classification, I'm kind of proud of that term. That's why I'm using it twice now, is that we also run it through over 30 million of predefined lines of rules and anti-rules to accurately identify and classify data. So to give you an example, for us to say, this is a passport, we need a start date, an expiration date, we need a regular expression that meets the country that is mentioned on the document, a single face picture, unless it says how to write. And then, so when it meets those rules and anti-rules, then we say, okay, this is a passport. And so we run it through 30 million of those. And then about a week later, we come to you and we present your data to you. And your data can be presented in about 5-6 different ways, right? How compliant are we? How AI ready are we? What is my security risk profile? And the security risk profile is effectively where we've taken IBM's numbers. So IBM did a report last year, which is called the cost of a data breach. And they put a numeric value on the question, how much is my data worth on the black market, and or how many fines or what in amount am I going to face from a legislator if I do have a breach, like our friends with the hotels in Las Vegas. So we do these reports and we can show you, well, actually, if you had a data breach with this data, your data on the black market would be worth about $1 million. So we were able to say, okay, well, here's your risk profile. We can also say, well, you want to do AI, fantastic. First of all, what are we talking about? Are we talking about help me rewrite my email? Or are we talking about, no, actually, we're building large language models, or what most companies actually should be doing and are doing, is they're building several small language models, which Microsoft likes to call agents. And these agents have a very specific purpose or function. And so you need very specific data and exclude everything else, and able to be like, okay, for this agent or small language model to work, we need the following. We need invoices, but it cannot contain A, B, C, and D. So then the question is, how AI ready are we? And so we can either use the approach of we're tagging everything that's ready to go. Here's how we do it. Or we exclude data. So we can say, well, out of all of your SharePoint sites, for example, 75% of them have any form of sensitive or PII or compliant data in them, which means they're unusable. But the other 25% are. So maybe we can start there. And so it will give you a fantastic insight, for the first time, a data-driven insight, so that IT is able to make data-driven decisions. And for the first time ever, management of a company will be able to be like, okay, so what is actually going on with my data, instead of just trying to protect it. And this is very interesting with the assessment, but it has other functions as well. One of them is that security companies are no longer accepting plausible deniability. Particularly CIOs and CISOs, they are now signing, in many cases, personal legal liability. And they have to prove that they have done everything in their power, that if they have a data breach, that they've managed their data, that it's okay, it's legal, it's worthy, whatever that means, and that we can tackle it. So for the first time ever, you're going to be able to be like, actually, there's 50,000 problems with your name on it, but let us help you solve them.
So yeah, bring this to AI, if you will. Why is data classification so crucial for AI? I mean, you hear these things around inaccuracies, hallucinations, biases. Does this have to do with classification or no?
Yes and no. Like, a lot of that is modeling and training and engineering, right? So there's a lot of companies right now that are focusing on AI services, because like even in all of the assessments or the training modules from Microsoft, right? They focus on groups, they focus on policies, they focus on the whole AI ready assessment ignores 100% of your data, and it focuses all on how your data should be. And that's very important, but that's not everything. So your data think of your data as the enablement of your goals. Without it, think of it like the right type of fuel. You can put water in your Bugatti, but it ain't going to go anywhere. So if you have the right type of fuel, your car is able to drive. Well, then you need a steering wheel. Then you need, ideally, a windscreen, or you're going to be eating some serious bugs in Texas in the summer, right? There's going to be a lot of metaphors here. Now, how good your data is, that's what we do. How well it's used, that's where more of the ERP AI services come in, and effectively be able to guide you. So we give you effectively the raw materials. Here's where all the data is. We ciphered through it. We looked at all your classifications, your specifications. We excluded everything we should. We included and labeled everything according to how you wanted it. And now we're able to go to that first step, that big dream, the achievement of all your goals. Effectively, I'm not selling you the dream to everything, just so we're clear, but I'm just matching that to everything that you've been hearing on the market so far. And now for the first time, we can build that bridge. And that bridge is going to enable that data to cross over. And for the first time ever, start working on those goals. But you still need to be able to guide the process. People think that, hey, I have data, I can buy AI, let's put them together and we have magic. And you're going to create magic, but it's going to probably explode. And you're not going to be too happy about it. And that's why all you would have to do is just Google finds. And you can use the big company. AI finds Google. Like how Google itself got fines in every country, all over the place, all over the time. Why? Because they're using illegal data. So data engineering, data handling, that I think Chris can probably write another 5 books on that. But it's one of those things that is very important, but it does start at your foundation. But you can do all the engineering and modeling in the world without data. You have a fantastic plan, but your Bugatti ain't driving.
You said something I think is really deserves reinforcement, and that is this, plausible deniability is going away. Again, for a quarter century, I saw business leaders saying, yeah, I should know what I have in my data, but I want the ability to just say, well, I didn't know. And for a long time, that was good enough, right? Well, we had these problems, we didn't know, and now we'll try to clean it up after the fact. That's no longer the case. And so if companies are really looking to adopt AI, and most are, you're going to have to do stuff with your data. You better know what's in there, because it is an extraordinary risk letting that kind of stuff get burned into whatever your LLMs or agents are going to be, and then you are going to be held culpable. So I think that's part of the shift in understanding that data classification. Again, it was never very popular, but now it's actually going to be necessary if you're going to start deploying these tools.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the other thing you mentioned is the importance of well labeled and structured data, but so much of the data out there is still unstructured or semi-structured. So how do we begin to bridge that gap?
Well, the easy answer, of course, is use the free assessment from URPA. No, but every tool, no matter what you do or where you go for, you effectively you need 3 things. The first, e-discovery, right? You need to be able to identify and classify some of the data. The next thing, and that's what your question is about, is you need some form of a remediation, right? There are plenty of tools in there, some of even the biggest ones, and all they do is they're like, if I'm going to use you as an example, Daniel, so they do a scan, they do a report, and then they give you, here's 150,000 problems. Good luck. If you want to do anything with it, hire us. You can have 10 people at the same time, and we're going to go in and we're going to go through everything. So remediation is a big thing. Are we looking to archive, delete, relocate data? Are we looking to label, exclude, include? And especially if we're talking security, for example, this is very, very big. You can have the most amazing security tool in the world, but if that security tool doesn't know where your data is, then you're going to have problems. That's why a lot of CISOs and CIOs right now are having issues, especially here in Canada, because in Canada we have all these security commissions, so you have to pass an audit. And one of those things in an audit is you have to be able to identify copies of sensitive data. Because you can have original file number 1, and congratulations, it has 5 layers of protection, it has sensitivity labels, retention labels, everything else. But if you cannot identify where everything else is, you have a very big problem. So remediation in that sense is absolutely huge. If we bring it back to AI, then we need to be able to either exclude, include, label, mark, or do something else with it. So that is number 2. The third one is exception handling or exception management. If you are a generic tool and you're just going to do everything in bulk, you're going to get in trouble, because every company is the same in one sense or another. I'm sure there's common things that everyone does, but at the same time, everyone's also a little different. Even the fact that there's 50 states in the US, there's all kinds of ways that different states are dealing with things, either from a compliance point of view or anything else. So we need to be able to look at it, to be able to map data, policies, mapping, and everything else to the existing scenario, how an organization sets things up. So to be able to deal with all of those exceptions, custom labels, custom management, custom everything, is going to be very, very important. That level of flexibility is going to be needed for any organization long term. Those are the 3 things that really, really are necessary.
What's the future look like? We've had some conversations here on the show even about human decision making versus automated decision making. I know there's more and more AI driven data classification tools out there. What's your philosophy on that, and what's the next year look like?
I am hoping that 2025 is the year when everyone realizes how important your data is, because everyone's going to get stalled and has been stalled for 2 years, arguably. And so one of those things that we're seeing now is that hackers aren't sitting still. That's why they have AI platforms as a service. We can see that making everything less personal is also not going to work in our favor in many ways. Why? Because at least now when I get one of the scam calls, I can be like, hey, that's not an American accent. Maybe I should pay attention. But that's all going to go away. So there's going to be a wide variety in surface-facing tools that are going to be taking us by storm. And if we aren't focused on the personal development of things, then we're in deep trouble. Where I'm most excited about AI, because AI effectively analyzes tool according to the rules that you give it. Now, where I'm super excited about it is particularly in healthcare, where if you can take somebody's bio information. So let's say there was an example where a young girl was practically blind, went to the eye doctor, and they made a scan of her iris and her eye and a complete profile of her eye. And then AI ran it through about 20 million scenarios. They picked the one that's best for her. And at the end of the session, she walked out with clearer vision than you and I can ever dream of. That's the stuff where I'm kind of like, okay, we have very specific sets of data, very specific rules, and that allows us to be extremely accurate. Right now, if you ask Google AI, Gemini, or anything else, you get sometimes the craziest answers. So to rely on that as your foundation for everything else, is there a future for it? Yeah, possibly. In the next year, possibly not. But is it something we should be focusing on? Absolutely. But to bring it back to the original question, right now, we have about 8-9 different carrots dangling in front of us. And they look amazing. They look orange. They look juicy. They look fantastic. But for us to get to the carrot, we have to do something about our data. That's why we start giving these away at URPA for free. If you want to have a free data scan for the first time in your business life, I'm assuming here, but so far I've been accurate 100%. For the first time, you'll be able to make data-driven decisions. And you're going to see a full landscape of the data that's given to us, what it is, where the copies are, if you should have it, if you should label it, if you should mark it. So for the first time ever, you can make data-driven decisions. So as North America right now, it's focused on AI, which is amazing, but we cannot stick our heads in the sand. We have to build the foundation properly. If not, we are the leaders in fluff. And for us to be the leaders in AI, we have to invest in the one thing that matters the most, and that is your data. That's what we do. That's what we offer. We're really good at it, and that's why we're working with URPA in making this happen for everyone.
Sounds good, Jaap. Thank you. We'll leave it there. And as Jaap mentions, they've been kind enough to partner with us on these free data risk assessments. So if you're interested in applying for that, go to urpaai.com/risk assessment. Chris, any final words of advice?
Earlier today, I posted on LinkedIn. I had a pop-up advertisement come from GoDaddy, which does like URLs and automated websites, bragging about their automated AI tools for helping you do advertising. And in the advertisement, it repeated a word twice.
Not exactly a good ad, huh?
I found it very poignant and very to the point. I mean, great automation. It's going to do wonders in automating certain tasks, but you're still going to need a human in the loop in the vast majority of this stuff. Otherwise, it's eventually a one-way trip to idiocracy.
Yeah. Sounds good. Well, thanks for joining everybody. Jaap, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate that. And like I said, his team has offered up these free data risk assessments, irpaai.com/risk assessment if you want more information. Otherwise, we're back Wednesday at noon, 9 Eastern for the next Digital Leader Show. Have a great week, everybody.
Cheers.